Welcome to Unload and Show Clear, the podcast about all things IDPA. And now, here's your host, a man for whom getting stuck in traffic was the only thing worse than sticking around for day one of nationals, Lloyd Bailey.
Welcome to another episode of Unload and Show Clear. All too often, gun owners and gun culture are portrayed in the worst possible ways in the media. This podcast aims to counter that narrative by shining a light on the members of gun culture who are involved in IDPA, International Defensive Pistol Association. Now, while IDPA members make up just a tiny fraction of the overall gun-owning public, I think they're a representative cross-section of that demographic. Salt-of-the-earth kinds of people who love their country and their fellow men and who are great people to be around. And this podcast is about them. Today, you're going to meet one of these awesome people. So sit back and enjoy the show. Here is this week's special guest. Our guest for today's show is Steve Koski from Alpine, Utah. Steve, welcome to the show.
Ollie, ollie, oxen free. I've always wanted to say that on a radio show.
And now you have. Check that one off the bucket list.
There we go.
All right. Well, tell us a little about yourself for those who don't know who you are. I don't know. Some crazy people living under a rock probably have never heard of you, but tell us who you are, what you do for a living there in Alpine, Utah.
Oh, what am I? I'm a mechanical engineer. I work for a small consulting firm. I fly around the country and look at refrigeration systems and sometimes compressed air systems. What else do I do? I shoot pistols. I've been shooting pistols for a long time. And so I guess I've been around enough and I've shot enough matches that a few people know who I am. You know, locally, everybody knows me, but, you get 100 miles from town and no one knows who you are.
You're also a podcasting star. For many years, you were the, as I like to think of you, as sort of the straight man or the adult in the room with a bunch of your shooting buddies on the Gun Dudes podcast. How did you get involved in that?
Well, I was involved with that before I even knew what a podcast was. The guy, Carl, just said it's kind of like a radio show, but people can download them on their computers. And I'm like, okay. So I, went and recorded a show with them. And then a month later, they're like, well, do you want to come do it again? And I'm like, well, sure. But why do you idiots have to do it at 7:00 on Saturday morning? Because they're all UPS drivers, and that's the only time that worked for their schedule. So yeah, I started, in with them. And how many years was I doing that with them? 4, 5, 6, 7 years. It was a long time.
Yeah. Maybe
not that many, because they only did 300 some episodes, and I started at like episode 72 or something. So maybe 5 years, 6 years could have been.
Probably.
And then Tom Nelson started up this PARAcast.
Yep.
And I've been doing that for a couple hundred episodes, 170 episodes now. So that's been pretty fun. And he does all the hard work, all the editing and producing. And I just show up and make stupid remarks and he edits them out. You could drink and swear and talk with your friends. What's not to like?
Dry fire in the background.
Click guns in the background and annoy people.
Right. So you guys are members of the Utah Defensive Pistol League, right? Is that your home club?
That's a home. Well, it's the biggest IDPA club in, call it the greater Salt Lake area. We don't just shoot IDPA. Well, in the early days, we did just shoot IDPA. I mean, our first match was 4 people up on BLM land in early 1997 or late 96. I don't remember exactly when. Back when IDPA was just days old. Our first box of targets had the circle, the lower circle. Do you know what are you familiar with that old target, Lloyd?
I am not.
So when IDPA first came out, they had the circle centered in the down one zone. So it was probably 3 or 4 inches lower than it is now. Now it's kind of upper,
right, upper chest, yeah.
Upper chest, whereas it used to be smack in the middle of the down one zone. But that only lasted for like our first box of targets. And when we ordered another box, that came with the other one. And I wish now that I would have, at the time, of course, you can't wait to get rid of the old targets. But now I wish I would have thrown 2 or 3 of those in a corner. They would have been collector's items. Now all we have is the old rule books with those the funny original target in it.
How did you get started? Have you always been interested in guns? Did you grow up around them? Is it something that you picked up later in life?
Well, in a former life, when I was a God-believing man, I served a mission for the Mormon Church. And when I was in Louisiana visiting with some people, some kid ran in the room and said, "Hey, we're selling everything to bail my dad out of jail. We're selling the VCR and we're selling a .22 rifle." And I said, "How much for the rifle?" He goes, $10. I couldn't get my wallet out of my pocket fast enough. I threw a $10 bill at that kid and I said, "Go get it." And he says, "Well, I'll bring it tomorrow." And I'm thinking, "Oh, great. I just lost $10. But sure enough, the next day he brings over this .22 rifle that had been in a barn fire and refinished with Krylon 2 or 3 times. And it was worth $10. So I just threw it in a box and mailed it home. This is back before, I just took it to the post office and just folded up some cardboard. And of course, luckily you can ship a rifle through the post office, but you can't do that with a handgun. I would have probably gotten a lot of trouble if I would have tried to do that with a handgun.
Probably.
Even back in 1989. So that kind of started me. So then, I'm done with the Mormon mission thing and I'm home going to college and I'm like, oh, let's go fool around with this and, buy a box of shells for $1 and go out and plink for a half hour. That was pretty darn fun. But of course, I was poor as a church mouse going to school and eating beans and rice. And so, I didn't really have any disposable income for a few years. But then when around the time we bought our first house, I bought a handgun and my neighbor was like, "Hey, we should go shoot this match." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And so he just grabs me by the scruff of the neck and says, "Come on." And so we go up and we shot an IPSC match. Back then, the USPSA didn't exist yet. It was all IPSC and there was limited and open. And we went up that winter and shot a couple matches and man, it was great fun. But, we were just way new and, just outclassed in every way you can imagine.
Right.
And I suppose, I got a little bit better at those matches and, I've been reading the gun magazines and IDPA had been doing a full court press in the press, and had really done a good job of announcing, the launch of this new pistol shooting sport. And so I suppose I was just like, "Hey, well, let's try this." And somehow, I don't remember exactly how, but there must have been other people in the room that said, "Hey, let's start a club and let's have a couple matches." And so I ran matches and we've shot at every range you can imagine around here because we don't really own a range. So we've kind of floated public land here and there and the sheriff's range and 3 or 4 private ranges. And we've been at a range called the Farm now out in the West Desert, which is a little bit of a pain because it's a drive from here. Right. But we've taken good care of their range and they've taken great care of us. And that's been a nice home place. And they have, it's much, I think they can get rifle shots out to 300 or 400 yards. And so the 3 gunners love it for that.
Nice.
What else what was I talking about? Where did I leave off?
How you got interested in guns? You said you went out and bought a handgun after you bought your first house. What was the handgun and what was the reasoning for going out and getting one?
Well, I bought a Smith & Wesson Model 65 357 stainless steel revolver. And I don't know. I kind of got to shoot that. Playing around with that .22 rifle kind of gave me the shooting bug. And then I honestly don't exactly know how one thing led to another. But then soon thereafter, I was like selling that revolver to buy a Glock 23 and, got on the Glock train and have been shooting Glocks ever since.
I started to say, you haven't put one down since, have you?
Not really. I owned an M&P for 2 or 3 years, but I just never could quite make the transition. Every time I put it down and pick the Glock back up, I was like, "Oh, that's how a gun's supposed to feel." And so after like 2 years, I'm like, why fight it? Just sell that thing and shoot what feels right. So
exactly. Now, you've been an IDPA member, like you said, since 97, I think it says on your IDPA member profile. And you have one of the first 1,700 U.S. member numbers. What was it like in the early days compared to today?
I'll tell you, I don't really know too much. There wasn't all that much that I was involved with between 97 and 2000. When was the World Shoot? 2011 was the first World Shoot. So I would just shot local matches, and then we'd go shoot the state match in Idaho, and we'd have a state match in Utah. I guess some of those other years, in those early years, we might have shot something in New Mexico or maybe Arizona in those years. But I was never at nationals. And then the sport kind of changes when you go to nationals and you get to see, really top level talent and see the bigger part of the organization. So that was 2011 through 2014 were the 4 years I worked nationals and got to shoot there. That opened, that introduced me to a lot more people. And so I'd say that was fun.
Do you remember that the first sanction match that you shot?
I do. It was in Colorado, and people kind of drug me there kicking and screaming. So like, it's a 9-hour drive. We're going to drive to the outskirts of Denver to shoot some stupid match. And I ended up winning stock service pistol and coming in second overall. Not that we have overall in IDPA, but that was crazy. Cause they're reading like 5, 4, 3, 2, and I'm figuring I'm like 17th, of course they're not going to call my name. And they call Steve Koski. I'm looking around. I'm like, is this, who put you guys up to this? So, and IDPA does a good job of giving people plaques, because that little plaque, that stupid little plaque. And I know people that like, third place marksman. That third place marksman plaque means
don't make fun of us.
Means more to them than you couldn't. There's no amount of money you could offer them to buy that third place marksman plaque.
When you're a high functioning marksman like me, that's just the thought that you get recognized, or that you got to some point where you're in the same vicinity as the good shooters, and you're like, hey, I got a little bit of recognition out of this. It keeps you coming back.
Oh yeah, it's a great little tease. Oh, kind of like the classification system. That's a great little thing coming back. I could do the next one. I could do that.
So your favorite division is SSP.
Yep.
And you compete with Glock 34 or Glock 17?
A Glock 17 for the past few years I've used in most of the matches. I used to shoot a 34, and I didn't even have a 17. And I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago, I got a 17, and I like it. I like the feel of it. I don't know, just a personal thing. I don't know that I actually shoot it any better. I probably shoot it worse, but I like it more.
Of all the matches that you've participated in, is there one that sticks out in your head that was particularly fun or inventive, or, if the first thing that comes to mind, the most wild or ridiculous stage or match that you ever shot?
Well, it's probably the car match that they did in Idaho a few years ago. They had a state match where every single stage you started in a car, and on like a third of the stages, or you were shooting under a car or over a car or under a plywood car, or, something like that. It was the whole match was cars. And we actually got to draw and shoot from, we got to, seated, holstered, draw, shoot out of this car, out the front seat, out the back, the next stage you were in the back seat or something. It was just so cool because so many cars, so much different shooting around cars. That was super, super memorable. The other stage that can probably never be duplicated was Ken Reed's parachute stuck in the tree stage. It's simulating that you're like a parachutist. You've been airdropped into enemy territory or something, and you're stuck in the tree, and they're coming to get you, and you got to fight off the attackers while you're swinging in the trees. So the way Ken Reed fixed this up is they have these big roofs, structures that can support anything. And so he made this steel bracket basically that swings on a pivot, but it can swing, in 360 degrees. And he And he made a platform that hangs down, and you stand on this platform, and you get strapped into it, so your back is fixed to this thing. And I think you started that one. We started, with the gun drawn, pointed at a cone or something on the ground, and then at the buzzer you pull a cord which releases you. Before the buzzer, you get pulled back to like a 20-degree angle or something. And then at the buzzer, with your weak hand, you pull a cord which pops the pin and starts you swinging. But the way it's set up is you don't just swing, in a single plane back and forth and back and forth. It kind of it goes back and forth, and then it starts to get a little sideways action, and pretty soon you're going sideways, and then you're going back and forth again, and you have to, there was like 16 shots required, so you got to shoot the gun empty and reload it.
Oh my goodness.
And it was just, man, it was a stage for the ages. That's probably the single coolest stage, because, we've all tracked a running target that's running left or right, or maybe even charging at you.
Mm-hmm.
But how often do you get to track, a target that's up and down and then left and right and angled sideways left, because you're swinging and land hits on bad guys like that. That was awesome. I hope they still have that mechanism somewhere and bring it out again. But that club has stopped shooting IDPA, so that may be on permanent storage somewhere, which is a shame. That's such a good prop.
How often now do you practice, aside from the little dry firing you do in the background on the podcast? How often do you dry fire and live fire practice, and what do you think is a good balance between the two?
Do you want the truth?
Yes.
Okay, I do.
And then you can tell me a lie, and I'll decide which is the better story.
Okay. We'll start with the truth. I rarely do any sort of practice. Maybe once every other month, I will do an hour of dry fire, and probably at the same frequency, I'll do some live fire. But it's usually to test out lately it's been to test out something. I just find that I shoot enough pistol matches that I kind of don't have any more juice to practice. Like I'm having all the fun I want shooting matches, and that's way more fun than practicing. So I have no regular practice schedule. It's just kind of by guess and by golly. I even have the Utah State USPSA match this Saturday, and we shot a 350 round match last Saturday. I shot the Monday before that in Florida, and the Saturday before that in Utah. It's like, that's enough.
So I guess the better question for you then is, how often are you shooting matches? How often do you get out and shoot these? I mean, obviously you shoot more than the average bear, but what is your shooting schedule like?
I probably shoot 3 to 4 matches a month. Sometimes if I'm lucky and I travel somewhere, it might be 5 or 6. I mean, I was in Atlanta once and I shot Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. I could have even shot Thursday night. This is after having shot Saturday before and then getting home and shooting on Saturday again. So most of my kids are out of the house. My youngest is 14, and she doesn't think dad's all that cool. So, I mean, we hang out a bit, right. But that's the fun thing about shooting different sports and shooting a bunch of different matches is you get a lot of exposure and a lot of challenging shooting just in the matches. And you can usually, if there's something you're struggling with, stick around after the match. They'll let you shoot in a bay for 20 or 30 minutes. And if you find something, sometimes I'll be like, oh man, I had a really hard time with these headshots. And so I'll work on that.
All right. Besides your gun, your holster, the standard stuff, the mag carriers and the eye and ear protection, what's one thing that you always make sure that you have in your range bag, and why?
Well, I'll tell you, last week, my range bag was a Walmart bag. And when I walked into the range, this is when I was in Florida, it had 200 rounds of ammo in it. And that's it, because I had already put on my eye protection out in the car, and I already had my mags and my belt on. So I had nothing. I had a water bottle. I may have had a water bottle in there. I'm going to say water. But does water work?
Sure.
We'll keep some water with you. The one thing I have figured out that some people just don't ever seem to get is put on the sunscreen at home and then wash your hands. Don't wash all your hands. Wash the front of your hands, because you can burn the back of your hands.
Yes.
But that's the last thing you ever need to be handling at a pistol match is any sort of sunscreen. Just take care of that before you leave the house. Nice hot water, clean the front of your hands off, dry them off on a nice cotton towel. And you can go stand in the sun all day long.
So, what is it about IDPA that you like? What is it that keeps you coming back to IDPA? And because a lot of shooters, I've met a lot of guys who they shot IDPA for a while and then they found IPSC or USPSA and then they kind of left IDPA behind. What is it that keeps you shooting IDPA? What's special about it for you?
Well, I have a huge history with IDPA, so it kind of has a special place in my heart just due to all the time that I've put in and the thousands of matches I've ran and shot and participated in and the friends that I've made and stuff. The thing that's truly great about IDPA is the ability of the stage designer to say, I want you to shoot these targets from inside this car. Or, they have a lot more power over the shooter than the USPSA stage designer does, where someone's going to get out of the car and just hose down all the targets. And then everyone else is too. But in USPSA and IDPA, you can just simply say, you must shoot these from inside the car. And that makes for a lot of fun. Or, you have to hold the baby with your weak hand the whole time and must fire strong hand only. You can that's just so much easier to do in IDPA, and people expect it and people like it. Where in USPSA, people just want a shooting challenge for the most part. And they don't like, you must carry the hammer from point A to point B. They really kind of bristle against that. And they want just a straight shooting challenge. But I love all the nonsense. In addition to the moving targets and the running targets, which of course, both sports have, IDPA just has a lot more ability to have you use props and, shoot these targets before you take the covers off and things like that. Right. That's the biggest carrot, I think, for me in IDPA. Very good.
If you were to meet a new shooter who was thinking about shooting IDPA, or it was like you when your friend grabbed you by the scruff of your neck and drug you out to a match, what would you tell somebody who was thinking about it? What would you tell them about the sport to encourage them to get involved?
I would say have a friend that will grab you by the scruff of the neck and just drag your dumb ass to a match, and you'll just be glad. That's what everyone needs, is because you'll be glad you did it, and you'll be like, oh, that was so fun. I want to come back and do that again. I can't believe we didn't do that 2.5 years ago. Yeah. So if you don't have someone that's doing that, then, it's a little more difficult because you have to be the adventurous one and find a club and find a match and drive out there yourself. And hi, I'm Steve, I don't know any of you, but
the great thing about what I've found, and I haven't shot any USPSA or IPSC, but what I've found with the people in IDPA is that they're super friendly, and it's like as soon as you walk up to a match, it's like you've always been there.
Yeah.
They don't seem to treat you any differently.
Oh, and USPSA is no different. Those people will just help. They will take the magazine pouches off their belt and let you use them. They want you to have a good time and, feel welcome just as much as everyone does in IDPA. So that's always great for new shooters. Yeah, I don't recall ever hearing a story of a new shooter that said, I went to this match and these guys were a bunch of jerks. They wouldn't show me how to do this. And I guess
where else can you go and somebody you've never met will give you a gun?
Oh yeah.
My first match in Texas, my gun broke. And I was there with my son, and I figured, okay, I'll just bag up my gun and I'll watch him shoot. And one of the guys from my local club here in Texas said, hang on a minute. And he went to his truck and he got a holster and some mag carriers and magazines and a Glock 34 and said, here, finish the match. And he'd never met me before in his life.
Yeah.
I mean, where else are you going to find that?
Yeah.
I mean, gun people are just...
I quite often carry a couple spare mag pouches and a spare holster in my range bag, just because like 1 out of 8 matches, someone will say, hey, Koski, you got a spare holster? Or, this guy needs a something. It's like, all right, I've been dragging this around for 8 matches. Now I finally get to use it. And it usually comes back sometimes that same day.
Well, Steve, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure, Lloyd. Is this where I say hasta la vista, baby?
That is.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Perfect. All right, that's all we've got for you today. Thank you so much to our special guest for coming on the show. If you know somebody in the IDPA community who deserves some recognition, I'd love to talk to them. Send me an email at Lloyd, Lloyd, at unloadpodcast.com. Check out the show notes for today's episode and listen to past episodes at unloadpodcast.com. And if you like what you hear on the show and you'd like to support us, help keep the lights on, pay the bills, we would love your support. Visit patreon.com/unload and make a small monthly contribution to help continue what we're doing here. Tune in again next week for another edition of Unload and Show Clear.